Hello and welcome to Startup Street. I'm Arundhati Ramlin, and with me from the Bangalore studio is Ritu Singh. These are the top headlines from the startup world. BYJU's founder and CEO sent out an email to all the employees announcing that the January salaries have been credited earlier than expected. BYJU Ravindran added that the company had to move mountains in order to make payroll as the edtech struggles with cash crunch and legal battles.
Paytm shares hit lower circuit for the third straight session, wiping out more than 20,000 crore rupees in market cap. Paytm shares are now at a record low after RBI's crackdown on the payment bank.
US-based asset management company Vanguard has cut the fair value of Ola for the third consecutive time to $1.88 billion as of November 30th. This is 29% lower than its previous fair value of $2.65 billion as of August 31.
Diagnostic and preventive healthcare service provider ThyroCare has acquired Think Health Diagnostics for an undisclosed sum. This marks ThyroCare's entry into the domain of ECG services at home.
Managed office space provider Devex has raised $7 million in a mix of equity and debt funding from banks, NBFCs, family offices and HNIs. The funds will be used for global expansion, adding more assets across India and developing a PropTech solution.
Meta's oversight board has determined Facebook video wrongfully suggesting that US President Joe Biden is a pedophile does not violate the company's current rules, while deeming those rules incoherent and too narrowly focused on AI-generated content. Our top story today: from major irregularities in KYC processes to submission of false compliance reports, lack of transparency, there have been a series of regulatory lapses, we understand, by Paytm Payment Bank over the course of the last 5 years, which ended up in RBI's stringent action against the bank recently. And one of the big concerns has been around the major KYC violations. The absence of KYC for lakhs of customers, PAN validation failures, instances of single PAN cards being linked to more than thousands of customers, total value of transactions often running into crores, breaching regulatory limits, and so on. There were also worries, we understand, about an unusually high number of dormant accounts, with as many as 30 out of 35 crore wallets Paytm maintained, 31 crore being inoperative. There were also concerns relating to money laundering arising from deficiencies in the KYC processes and lack of transaction monitoring. To be clear, these Paytm customer accounts are under scrutiny because of weak KYC, but there are no allegations or regulatory concerns so far relating to the company or its founder having indulged in any money laundering. The other big concern, we understand, was the fact that the bank did not maintain an arm's length distance in dealing with promoter group entities. Its financial, non-financial businesses were often mingled, and compliances were often found to be false. So all of this led to the action that we saw from the RBI, and the way out could be tough. Joining me now to discuss the fallout of this crisis and how this saga may unfold are two experts: Sandeep Parekh, founder at Finsec Law Advisors, and Nikhil, the founder of MediaNama. Sandeep and Nikhil, thank you so much for your time here on CNBC TV18. Sandeep, let me quickly start with you, because you heard the kind of repeated regulatory lapses which caused this RBI action on Paytm. In this scenario, firstly, who do shareholders hold accountable? Because this has gone on for 5 years now.
Right. So I think obviously it's a combination of the main party to be held accountable would be the management. But there is an oversight function of the board as well. So I mean, there would be some kind of liability and scrutiny which RBI would apply to the board as well. Of course, we don't know any of these, the details of this officially. What we have is that one-page order which doesn't get into the details, unlike SEBI orders. So we I think a lot of it is shadow boxing in terms of sources and stuff. But based on assuming those sources are accurate, I would just say that this is it seems to be pretty serious for them to really shut down an entire business.
Well, yes, and that's true. RBI's order not as detailed as SEBI rightly said. But Nikhil, let me quickly bring you in. You know, your paper interestingly recently said that RBI's action, though not unexpected, seems to be problematic because of the severity of the action. Let me ask you then, you know, in instances like this, where there's repeated compliance failure, if customers are exposed to data breaches, misuse of accounts, related party transactions are not being reported and so on, what other action should RBI have taken?
Look, at the point that I wrote the paper, all of these current allegations, which are also, by the way, not official, I wasn't aware of those. But even then, I think that they could have taken stringent action instead of, let's say, preventing deposits into the account, but asking, let's say, 197 and payment services to shift their nodal accounts to other banks and essentially operationally shutting down the entire bank with, apparently, at least from the order, no way back is a problem. I'm not saying that the RBI shouldn't have acted. I'm not saying that they shouldn't have acted strongly. There have been repeat complaints and repeat orders regarding Paytm. But just also remember that there are millions of merchants and customers that are using Paytm, especially from a merchant perspective. They probably have the largest merchant base in the country. To essentially completely disenfranchise them in one sweep, I think is a bit of a problem. And when there are third-party liabilities, you need to take those into account. So I would say that they could have said that, you know, if, let's say, certain actions are followed within a certain period of time, they will consider ways of easing those up. And, you know, that's the right mature signal to send for a regulator, not just, you know, just like a chop their heads off kind of a situation, which is what it looks like right now.
Sandeep, how would you respond to that? There certainly must have been, you know, grave enough non-compliance issues, etc., for RBI to have acted the way that it did. I mean, would it be fair to say that the regulator has overreacted? What do you make of this?
So I think for me to answer that question, I need to know the facts. And unfortunately, the facts have only come from sources. So, you know, beyond kind of saying that, you know, if they've acted harshly, there's probably a pretty strong case, you know. Like Pahwa said, I think they've acted very, very strongly. It's almost unprecedented to just overnight shut down the asset side of the bank. But, you know, so I think it's fair to say that, you know, RBI has been acting very fairly over the past, over its entire history, really. So if they've been this harsh, then there's probably going to be some data and some, you know, solid concerns for them to take, you know, basically, probably the most drastic step of shutting down. And of course, they, you know, it's not a beheading of us, but you know, just maybe they'll give them time to re-engineer their systems, bring in some reg tech, may make things better before they're allowed to restart.
Sandeep, interesting you say that maybe, you know, RBI will let them function again, but, you know, from many people we've been speaking to, it doesn't look like there's a way out, at least as far as the banking part of the business is concerned, because, you know, the notification of RBI, if you read it, it seems to have some sort of a finality. There's nothing said in it, unlike past instances, that if deficiencies are rectified, you know, RBI would lift the embargo. Is that not how you read it?
No, so no, that's not how I read it, really. So I think, you know, for a period of, let's say, 3 months, 6 months, if they're able to clean up the systems, do it through third-party audits, etc., I think there is a future for them. I don't think this is the end for them. But I think they'll have to have pretty drastic action. They'll have to bring in a lot of external audits, whether it's legal, technical, or financial, etc., and then, you know, just maybe prove to RBI again that they deserve to run the business.
Well, we'll have to see what the regulator does. There's no point second guessing it. But Nikhil, what next for Paytm, for Vijay Shekhar Sharma? Because even if you keep aside the banking activity, payments also get affected because many merchants have their bank accounts at the back end linked to them. They don't really have the payment aggregator license to onboard anymore. And just UPI transaction doesn't really make any money. So what next, you think?
So before I get to that, I just want to say that RBI hasn't necessarily been fair in the past, right? Look at, let's say, them declining to give InstaMojo, which also has a large number of merchants dependent on them, small merchants, online merchants dependent on them, a license because of net worth considerations. Look at the data localization that was forced upon WhatsApp without any public consultation, without any warning, without sufficient timeline, where their rollout was halted or completely constrained really constrained for a year and a half. So to say that the RBI has been fair to the payments ecosystem in the past is incorrect. And there's several other instances about the botched rollout of tokenization. Consumers still face difficulties making international payments, and recurring payments keep failing. So the RBI, in my opinion, is really not sufficiently qualified to run the payments ecosystem as a central bank. It's better running the monetary policy, fiscal policy, and the economy. I think it should go with the Wadhal Committee recommendation from 2016 and set up a separate payments regulatory board and let them regulate the payments ecosystem, let them build the capacity. This is not something that the central bank should be spending time on, to be honest. With regards to Vijay Shekhar Sharma and what happens to... Sure, go on.
Yeah, sure. Unfortunately, Nikhil, we've run out of time. But, thank you very much. That's a strong statement you're making that, perhaps RBI is not equipped to deal with payment companies. There should be a separate regulator. We'll leave that conversation for another time. But thanks very much. That's as far as Paytm is concerned. But there's more we have to talk about. Arundhati, is back to you in the Mumbai studio.
Absolutely, Ritu. Paytm isn't the only startup in trouble. EdTech firm BYJU is battling massive financial woes. In the midst of a cash crunch, BYJU's founder and CEO BYJU Ravindran has sent an email to employees announcing that January's salaries have been paid earlier than promised. But BYJU is facing a lawsuit from its overseas lenders after it failed to meet payment deadlines. Gentlemen, stay with us, Nikhil, Sandeep. But before that, Aishwarya Anand is standing by with more on what's happened at BYJU's. Aishwarya?
It's been a hectic and a highly emotional week at BYJU's, and the challenges facing the company have indeed left founder and group CEO BYJU Ravindran shaken. After clearing delayed salaries for the month of January, Ravindran, in a letter to employees last evening, confessed he has had to move mountains for months to make this payroll. For BYJU's, salaries add up to 70 crore rupees a month, and the delay, albeit a short one, has underlined the severity of liquidity crunch at the company. In fact, BYJU's US unit even filed for bankruptcy after defaulting on the $1.2 billion loan. Now, it is to be noted that some of the lenders have also initiated bankruptcy proceedings against BYJU's in India. The weight of these liabilities seems heavier given the billion-dollar loss posted by the company for FY22. And even as we await the audited FY23 financials, BYJU says it is seeking to script a turnaround, cut monthly burn and achieve profitability. To make it happen, BYJU's launched a rights issue on the 29th of January to raise $200 million in emergency cash, that too by slashing its valuation by 99% from $22 billion to just about $225 million. Calling the rights issue a fight, Ravindran, in his letter last evening, also slammed select investors, saying a few vested interests are trying to sabotage the company by impeding the rights issue. The comment is now latest in a series of bitter exchanges between BYJU's management and some key investors who have demanded an extraordinary general meeting calling for the ouster of Ravindran and a change in leadership. Investors have also called for a reconstitution of the company's board, saying that BYJU's founders have been controlling it since 3 of them walked out in June 2023. Ravindran, who doesn't want to give up his corner office, told investors, "You have no right to vote on CEO or management change." The standoff has surely raised question marks over the potential success of the rights issue, but the company claims that most investors, barring a few worrying ones, are standing in support. We'll have to wait to see if BYJU Ravindran can move this mountain.
All right, Aishwarya, thank you so much for those details. Sandeep, Nikhil, thank you for being here. But Sandeep, I'm going to quickly come to you first. I know you're on a bit of a time crunch. So a group of investors of BYJU's who hold about 30% sought to oust the top brass of the company led by BYJU Ravindran, saying they were deeply concerned about the future stability of the company under its current leadership. However, BYJU Ravindran was quick to let them know that they did not have the right to do this. So what can the investors do? What sort of legal recourse can investors take, if there are any, at this point?
No, so investors, shareholders are the kings, right? Except they exercise their powers only through shareholder meetings and not directly through. So I think what BYJU is saying is technically correct that the shareholders cannot remove the CEO, but they can remove the entire board and get new people in, and the new board can then of course elect a different CEO. So I think it's important to know that if somebody has 30% shares, would typically have quite a presence in deciding who the CEO is going to be. So it's probably just a matter of time before they get to get their own person. And just a correction to your colleague is $225 million valuation after a $200 million injection. So that's pretty much zero valuation that's being topped off even by the existing promoter. So I think it has indeed collapsed, and I don't know what they want to fight about if the company doesn't remain. But like I said, yes, a 30% shareholder group would have a very substantial say in deciding who the CEO is going to be. But it won't be direct; it'll be indirect.
Right, it won't be as direct, it will be indirect. And we also saw BYJU struggle to pay their payrolls for January. So the founder wrote to the employees saying that he had to move mountains to make payroll. So what does this mean for BYJU's? Where does it leave the company? There's only so much you can do to make payroll every month if you don't have the funds for it.
No, especially, so I'll end because I need to leave. So just kind of quick 30-second comment.
Yeah.
So I mean, when a company like BYJU's is run on investor money, I think they're completely beholden to them. When your losses are greater than your revenue, I think it's a very different business model, because then it's kind of punting on the future. And with a model like that, you can't really make enemies of your investors. So I think I don't see a future at all for the company to survive in any form at all. It'll just be a messy dispute, which is of course going to be good for us lawyers, but it will end up in just intermittent disputes.
All right.
Thank you.
Right, so you don't see any future for the company. All right, Sandeep, thank you so much for joining us. Nikhil, it is time for us to take a short break, but we will come to you on the other side to discuss what happens to BYJU's going forward. Welcome back. You're still with us on Startup Street. EdTech firm BYJU is battling massive financial woes. So what's the way ahead for the company? We still have with us Nikhil Pahwa, the founder of MediaNama. Nikhil, now BYJU has proposed a rights issue at a steep 99% cut to its peak valuation of $22 billion. Now, this will obviously reset the cap table at the EdTech company, and any existing investor in BYJU who doesn't participate in the rights issue may practically see its stake fully erode. For example, Process will have to pay $18 million to retain its 9% stake, while Peak 15 will have to pump in $14 million. Do you think at this point that this will go through without any hiccups?
You know, I'm just surprised that investors don't try and change the management. I know there's a 30% group of investors that are trying to do that. This is a deeply problematic company in the way that, you know, in its history, they have been essentially almost running like a lending company. They provide loans to parents and then take high fees on the basis of those loans. The model was never sustainable, but investors let this happen. We're in a situation right now where the valuation is completely been, like the value in the company is almost completely wiped out. There's very little left. And, you know, even if it's at a 99% cut to its previous valuation, I think it's just BYJU's trying to get some money in the company to start over with it. Because, you know, I think we will see a situation where there's going to be more of a battle between the investors. And I'm just wondering what the board was doing all along. You know, BYJU has had change of accountants of accountancy firms repeatedly. It's had its accounting practices has been questioned. Issues have also been raised in Parliament by Karti Chidambaram about the functioning of some of these edtech firms and the extractive nature, almost like the preying nature of their business. I'm just surprised this company is still around, to be honest.
Absolutely. So you're saying that you are surprised that the company is still around. You know, you've mentioned all of these things. So let's take a step back. You know, there have been so many layoffs, governance issues, funding troubles, all of that that you've pointed out. So there's always been issues over the last few years. So where do you think that BYJU went wrong? And what are the options in front of it? Where does this leave the startup?
I think the investors are also to blame to some extent, right? They were trying to scale rapidly a business and grow it in terms of revenue on its way to probably an IPO at some point in time, without looking at the fundamentals of how the business was actually operating in terms of the alleged mis-selling that was going on. You know, there's a book that's recently come out that indicates how the poor who didn't really understand the quality of the content and how they were preyed upon. And then there's enough disclosures about how people were, it seems, and I don't have evidence of this, but people seemed it's signed on to BYJU's, assuming that they're signing for a few months as a trial, but actually they were signing a lending document. These are allegations that have been made in the past. I can't, at some level, I would say that the board was asleep at the wheel, and as long as the valuation kept growing, nobody cared. That's what happens when you're riding a tiger, right? As long as you're on the tiger, it's fine. Now the tide's going out, so I honestly don't see a way back for them, and I don't know what the board in particular was doing over here in terms of did an increase in valuation justify everything that was going on? Also, it's easier to ask questions of these companies once they're in trouble. I think the role of the board is to ask these questions before trouble hits them. And I would say the investors are as much to blame for this as the promoters are.
Absolutely, Nikhil. Thank you so much for joining us. So Nikhil and Sandeep both saying that the investors are also to blame and they don't see a way back for the company. Nikhil, thank you so much for joining us on the show today. And with that, Ritu, it's back to you.
Well, thanks, Arundhati, for taking us through that conversation. Speaking of BYJU's board, by the way, for our viewers, it is just left with BYJU Ravindran, the co-founder, and his wife Divya Gokulnath, and his brother Riju Ravindran. So, you know, there's not much to speak of as far as the BYJU board is concerned. But here's a CNBC-TV18 exclusive. Sources have told us that Exim T Systems is expected to launch its initial public offering later this month, and it is going to be the first EV charging solution company to go public. Yash Jain broke that story for us and joins in with the details. Yash.
Well, speak about the auto sector, and electric vehicle or EV is the buzzword, and we could soon have first listed entity from the electric vehicle charging space. What we've been given to understand from our sources is that Exim T Systems IPO is expected to be launched later this month. My sources tell me that that could be around the 3rd or 4th week of February itself. As far as the company and the IPO details are concerned, what I've been given to understand is that the IPO could be priced anywhere between 140 to 145 rupees per share. The company is looking at a post-listing market cap of about 1,750 crore rupees. As far as the fundraising plan is concerned, the company expects to raise about 430 crore rupees through its IPO. Out of that 430 crore rupees, about 330 crore is expected to be the fresh issue, which means that would be the funds which is expected to come into the company. The company is expected to use those funds towards a new facility at Telangana. There is also some part of it which is expected to be used towards debt repayment as well as working capital requirement. As far as the details on the financials for this company are concerned, look at the FY23 numbers. The sales have been steady. The total revenue from operations stood at about 708 crore rupees, profit at about 6 crore rupees, and borrowing stood at about 118 crore rupees. Now, out of the total revenue, the reason why I say that it's an important player in the EV charging space, FY23, about 32% of the total revenue came from the EV charging space. This was just about 8% the previous financial year. Look at the orders that they've been receiving as far as the EV charging space is concerned. FY23, the order value from this space was about 295 crore rupees. FY21, the same amount stood at just about 78 crore rupees. Now, if you look at the shareholding pattern for this company, HFCL, which is of course a listed entity, holds about 8.19%. Vinsant Brothers, they hold about 14%, and Satellite Finance with about 5% stake in the company.
Yash, thanks very much for taking us through that. On that note, it's a wrap on this edition of Startup Street. From Arundhati and me, it's a goodbye and thanks for watching. But stay with CNBC-TV18. News and updates will continue on the other side.